Behind the Lines.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Season 4, Episode 5, try number 2 of Behind the Lines, where we bring you the experts to you. I'm Evan Morrison. Joining me from RoboSports Network is Nick Lawrence, and this week we're talking all about using COTS. Tonight's episode will focus on how you can use COTS parts to expand your team's capabilities.
Before we hand it off to our expert, we do need to mention that the views expressed by Behind the Lines hosts and guests are those of the individual and do not necessarily reflect the views of FIRST or FIRST participants. Also, in the interest of full disclosure, I work as a mechanical systems designer for AndyMark and work heavily on developing products for FIRST competition robots.
Don't forget that you can submit questions to us throughout the show by tweeting at RoboSportsNet with hashtag FRCBTL, by posting a message to our Facebook page, or by typing !Q followed by your question in the Twitch stream chat.
And with that, we're really excited to bring longtime FIRSTer and COTS proliferation advocate, Justin Foss from Team 558. Justin, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey, good evening, everyone. I'm really excited to be here to talk about something we're pretty passionate about on 558 and something I enjoy talking about very much, the use of COTS products. I've been involved in FIRST since 2003 in high school, and I currently work with Elm City Robotics in New Haven, Connecticut.
Awesome. Well, we're really glad to have Justin on, and without further ado, let's get into the presentation.
All right, so let's start here. Let's pop it up. All right, so COTS tagline for all of this is, of course, why build what you can just buy. All right, so it's a new season. You've just seen the game. You've got plenty of ideas. Let's just take a step back. Your ideas are great, but what's really needed to make them happen? What is the time, money, materials, and resources that you have at your disposal as a team? So first, you got to really evaluate those resources. What are your team's in-house abilities? What can you expect from your sponsors, if anything? What are your students trained on? Equipment, CAD. What are your monetary constraints? Have you really pushed to develop your sponsor base this year? Do you have extra money laying around? Most teams don't, but maybe you do. And what are your time constraints in terms of shop time? Some teams meet every day. Some teams only get to meet a few days a week. You really need to keep track of what you have available to you. All right, now it's time to really do some thinking. What are some real-life applications of parts that you want to see on the robot this year? Where have you seen something similar? And what can you repurpose for a different use on your robot? All right. So really, when you think back in previous games and everything, you have to really consider what are the pros and cons of these off-the-shelf parts. Well, pros are easy. The availability, the parts are already made. They're pretty easy to assemble. Some smarter people than us have put these into the world of FIRST or into the world of engineering in general. They're easy to replace because you can buy the spare parts. And really, it allows your team to focus on the strategy and integration rather than complete detailed design of every component. Back in the day in FRC, you really had to design everything from scratch. And with this proliferation of COTS parts, teams can really focus more on the strategy and implementation of components and focus a smaller amount of time on individual part design. So what are some cons? Well, might not be a perfect fit, probably will cost more, and it's going to take some time and research to really figure out what you need to use and what's available out there. All right, so who are the common suppliers that we talk about when we talk about COTS? Well, my favorite supplier, no surprise, McMaster. It literally has pretty much everything and anything you can think of. But we do have some FRC or robot company specific suppliers. We've got companies like AndyMark, VexPro, West Coast Products, Rev, Competition Robot Parts. We've got the stuff that comes in the kit of parts. We've got the control system stuff. We've got lots of mechanical, electrical, and pneumatics components. SDPSI is really good for some power transmission stuff. Sometimes people call them out-of-stock drive product. out-of-stock drive products. But if you get in there in time and You order what you need. They've been pretty reliable. So who are the alternate part suppliers that you might not think of? Well, expected and unexpected places are always a good place to look. So some expected places like Bimba, Clipper, SMC for those pneumatic parts you might need. Lowe's and Home Depot are great for idea generation and basic supplies, and especially excellent for prototypes. But some other ones like marine supply companies, you can get things like pulleys, spactor cable, especially good for lifts. Bumper materials, if you're into that sailcloth for those slick bumpers. And also auto parts stores, for the tools you might need, some 12-volt lighting if you're into that, and maybe a ratchet if you haven't seen Vex's new product. All right, so this is something I'm pretty passionate about. It's becoming a McMaster master. So what does that really mean? It means knowing the tools available to you on the website to really dig in and find parts that you might need. There's a lot of parts that teams use each year, and people always ask, where you get these parts? Like the yellow wheels you saw people using for shooting this year, or the blue wheels for shooting in previous years. A lot of those come from McMaster. The urethane rubber tubing that people use for their intake rollers. All that stuff is right from McMaster, and that's normally like next day or 2-day shipping, which means in your hands faster than almost any other supplier. So becoming a McMaster master really just means spending the time on the website, learning what the search terms are, finding alternate names for what the product might be. And don't give up on your first attempt to find something because it's probably on the website. You just haven't typed in the right name yet. So I challenge everyone on my team to become a McMaster master, and people often contact me to find out where they might be able to get something a little bit off base. And McMaster is my favorite place to look. It's definitely got the best designed catalog available online out of any company that I've ever dealt with. All right, next slide.
And I'll add to that as well that almost everything you can get on their website, you can download a CAD model for. So if your team CADs their robot, it's really easy to go get the model for whatever part you're buying and just put it in your CAD. I mean, even bolts, which most teams aren't going to go CAD, but you can download models of their bolts.
Yeah, so if you have an application where you just have a bolt hole, sometimes you really want to check and throw a bolt in there to see how high the head of that bolt is, because we've run into it before where, oops, we forgot the hardware, and it could cause some big problems if you're not paying attention. All right, so what are really the applications for COTS? Well, pretty much everywhere these days. Nearly every subsystem can be produced with a combination of COTS parts along with a few small custom pieces. On 558, those custom pieces are normally polycarbonate with a template that's just printed 1-to-1 and then match drilled with a unibit and a regular set of bits and cut out on a bandsaw. It's become kind of our standard of building, and we've done it for aluminum and polycarb, but we really like polycarbonate. Some other applications, of course, drivetrains. The three most important parts of a robot: the drivetrain, the drivetrain, and the drivetrain. Well, good news for everyone out there. You can just use the kit of parts drivetrain. And I really advocate that that's a really great way to go if you don't have the time or money to develop your own custom drivetrain. And if you're going for a custom drivetrain for the first time in season, take a step back, look at the kit of parts drivetrain, and build that instead. Because you should not be developing a brand new drive system in the middle of build season. Now, companies have made it easier to go about building these drive systems if you are going to go the custom route. AndyMark and Vex both offer a large myriad of components that you can use to build West Coast Drive parallel plate drives and even swerve drives, Mechanism if you're feeling dangerous. There's lots of stuff out there, and really take the time to look through these companies' websites. AndyMark and Vex are really probably your go-to for this kind of product. An application, a drivetrain example from 558's robot back in 2014. Pretty much 100% off-the-shelf parts. I mean, we're talking bolts from McMaster, sprockets, spacers, gearboxes. Everything you see in this picture was just purchased and then put together. And the drivetrain went over 120 matches that season, wasn't touched after it was initially built. That's really the power of some of this, If the companies who have built these parts and put more thought into it, why develop so much stuff on your own when you can build something like this? Now, 558, of course, has been evolving over the past few seasons. More money, more resources in terms of the team as we grow our success. So in 2017, we started looking at some alternate options. And we looked at the West Coast products, bearing blocks, and we started doing a little bit of West Coast drive. I mean, a modified West Coast drive. We don't direct driver wheels, and we still use 35 chain because we're old school like that. But there's such a proliferation of COTS. Like now you can get Coulson wheels with hex broach already through them. And the chassis you see here is just that. This is the rebuild chassis from last year. It took the kids 2 nights to do all the machining on all of this. It was part of our withholding allowance when we went into our second event and, custom parts. So, but we did strip off all of the COTS, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, how COTS don't cost COTS don't cost anything against your withholding. So what are some other applications? Well, grippers and intakes. You see here like a roller claw basically built with Versa chassis materials. Again, we have plenty of options out there now for motors, gearboxes, wheels, lots of great options for grippy wheels for sucking in game pieces. And then on the right, you've got the intake from 558 this year that sucked the gears off the floor. The lower roller there is some McMaster urethane. The upper roller, McMaster as well. Belts and pulleys are all from Vex. You've got some McMaster bevel gears, and then driving it Versa Planetary. All off-the-shelf parts. The only thing you see custom on that whole setup is the cross shafts are cut down hex, and the plates that everything is mounted to is just some polycarbonate. Like I said, that was just 1-to-1 templated, drilled, and made in-house. So you can get pretty precise with all of this stuff, and then just bolt some COTS together and have a pretty competitive machine. 558's resources doesn't really allow us to do much more than try and do everything in-house by hand. So that's kind of what we've stuck to. So what's another application? Well, another thing 558 is really big on is pneumatics. We think that pretty much if you need to drive something to a position, or just 2 positions, that pneumatics are the answer. They're forgiving, they're easy to tweak, you can change the speeds and pressure, and there's a lot going on for them. So what are they really good for though? Linear motion, angular motion, repeatability, constant force, ease of control, and in some applications, buzzer beating technology. So back in 2013, teams had the pneumatics hooked up so that with a single acting solenoid, they could just drive into the pyramid and the robot would hang itself at the end of the match, which is pretty cool. And again, pneumatics are COTS. Why? Well, because they have to be. The rules specify that you're not allowed to modify them. So that means they're all COTS. All right, so a new topic getting pretty hot this year, vision. So vision tracking in the past has been pretty hard for most teams, but good news to a lot of teams out there now. The Limelight from 987 is here. We've got the Pixie Cam, the Javoice, and then of course cell phone cameras, which are becoming more and more prolific. Teams like 254 and 125 kind of really dove into that. But essentially, these are now starting to let you just plug this stuff in and set it up and get it running within a couple meetings. And I think that's really an amazing thing for the future of FRC in terms of this. 558 for the first time used the Pixie for tracking the side peg, and it worked excellent. We really liked it. And we're looking forward to developing our vision in the future. And we think the technology is finally here for those lower software or lower resource teams to really dive into this and take advantage of it. All right, so some more applications. This time just pulled straight from the Vex website. We've got 2 different robots basically using just the gusset system and tubing from Vex. You can see here a robot basically inspired by 973 from 2011 and a robot based off of the Cheesy Poofs from 2014. So these are basically 100% COTS robots, just not COTS because the tubing has been cut. So, but essentially you can see here how you could build an entire robot from the parts that are now available out there. And, these were previously done a few years back, and there's even more parts out there now. Yeah,
especially with like intake rollers and things. One of the starting last year, we got all these squishy wheels coming from West Coast Products and Andy Mark, and Andy Mark has stealth wheels, and Vex has their the Coulsons, and then you go on McMaster and you can buy the urethane that goes over the hex shaft, and you can go to, well, now Vex has the roller system as well if you want to do that. So like just on a piece of two hex bearings and and a gearbox, you can create pretty much any kind of roller intake you would ever want. It's pretty amazing.
So if you haven't seen any of those new wheels that are out there, take some time to dig through West Coast Products and Andy Mark and Vex's websites. The newer small 2-inch stealth wheels come in all kinds of different durometers. And of course, they have the flexible wheels too. Certainly, a lot of nice things came out this past season that helped people pick up gears, which may or may not have an effect on our ability to pick up things in the future. All right, so a pretty hot topic recently, or more so every year, is the withholding allowance and cheesecake. And what does that mean for your team? Well, COTS doesn't count against your withholding allowance, which means that you can bring as much off-the-shelf parts into a competition as you want for yourself or for others. So what does that really mean? Well, it means cheesecake is pretty easy, especially with even more new products. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But if you want to fix yourself or change things to your robot between competitions, or you think you might want to help other teams, bring extra parts. Bring extra off-the-shelf parts, and you can really make an impact on another team's season. Start working with them early or help them get their robot running. Like, if you have parts with you, you can not only make yourself better, but you can help really raise the floor of the competition and help other teams get into those elimination tournaments. So here's a case study in this whole withholding allowance thing. Basically, Bob did a rebuild. Not a rebuild, but an off-season project off of their extra chassis, their practice chassis. So what you see here is essentially a gear robot, a gear and climb robot. Basically a 75-pound competition-ready robot. But if you look at the breakdown of the weight of COTS versus non-COTS, like you're talking 50% off-the-shelf parts, 50% custom parts by weight, which means that if you can get a few more of these custom parts down below weight, you could technically walk in with a whole new robot, which teams have done. So this is a game that people can play. Like, you can really do crazy things with your withholding allowance when you take out the off-the-shelf parts. And all it takes is a drive to be, a drive to be competitive and a little bit of thinking ahead of time. And like I said, the more parts that you bring in, the more opportunities you have to make your robot better. You're not stuck with anything you build in FRC. And I don't want any team to think that they are. All right, so hot topic for today. Lots of new products released in the last couple weeks. So Andy Mark dropped the new Redline motor, some new gearboxes for the 775 Pros and the Redlines, obviously. They've got gearboxes for the actual drivetrain. They've got new planetary gearboxes, some 32 DP gears, a new magnetic encoder, lots of new sprockets, and some other various components that go along with all that stuff. Make sure you check out Andy Mark's website and really dig through these new products. And then Vex today teasing us 1 hour at a time. We got the new motor controller. We've got polycarbonate roller tubing and the new 1x1 tubing. We've got the 1x1 Versa block, the Versa roller system, the Versa planetary light, GT2 belts and pulleys, female outputs for the Versa planetary, more gears, new chain tools, new sprockets, 180-degree Versa planetary kit, some adapters, half-inch bevel gears, and we all wish we had this one season sooner, the Versa planetary ratchet slice. So this is a lot of new stuff entering the market for this year, and I don't think it'll be the end of the new stuff we'll see before the end of the season. I think there's more coming, maybe not quite this volume, but I think more things will show up. So keep your eye on Andy Mark and Vex Pro and Competition Robot Parts and Rev and all those other guys, and to make sure that you know what's out there and available as the season moves forward. So just a quick recap. When you think about the game and what you're going to build, generate those ideas evaluate your resources. Think about this question. Why build what you can buy? Is it the best use of your resources, and is it the best way to train your students? Focus on the integration of these off-the-shelf parts and minimize the custom stuff to get yourself running as fast as possible. I think that's the end of the presentation. I know I probably went through that pretty quick, but we have plenty of time for Q&A, and I'm happy to discuss a lot of this stuff.
Thanks for that presentation, Justin. You know, it's actually kind of a good thing that we waited, inadvertently waited another week. So this was timed in accordance with Vex's big product launch today as well. So you're able to hit on those points. So your presentation is as relevant as it could be.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, we got unluckily lucky.
Yeah. Well, I think you're right, though, that we haven't seen the end of it. I think that there's going to be a few things. I know that there's a few things coming out around kickoff or so. I think that there might be some more from other companies we haven't heard from, especially Rev. We haven't heard a lot from them yet. Definitely looks like a lot of COTS parts is going to be the name of 2018.
Yeah. And there's some new suppliers on the market too. I think Aussie Boards just started up. They're in Australia, mostly electronic stuff. They've got what looks like a nifty new board that goes on the back of your 775 motors and does a reverse connector for space savings. So, you know, it's always, the ecosystem is growing, which is always really, you know, beneficial to teams. So, yeah, we're gonna take some questions. We have a few good ones posted earlier from Chief Delphi, as well as if any of you in the chat have questions that you're thinking of as they come up, just type them in the Twitch chat, !Q, and we'll start answering them. So I think the first question we got coming up is, my team only has hand tools. This is sometimes a common one. What can you build with COTS? What can we build with COTS if you were the team? So we'll start with Justin, and then Nick and myself. We can chime in as well.
Right. So I think my answer to this is, what can't you build with hand tools? If you have a hacksaw and a hand drill and access to paper, like, you can pretty much build any robot out there these days. I mean, for a lot of the stuff, you're match drilling for the gussets, you're match drilling for gearboxes. Like, you got a chain brake, you can put chains together. Like, I would avoid belt drive maybe with hand tools and stick with chain. But other than that, you're not limited at all. Like, I would say when 558 really started, and still, most of our stuff is done with hand tools. Like, anything we do with our bandsaw, you could do with a jigsaw. There's nothing terribly complicated about cutting polycarbonate or plywood to make a good robot.
Yeah, I think in the last few years, especially, the suppliers in this marketplace have done a pretty good job of listening to the resources teams actually have. Like, probably one of the best examples is all of the VersaFrame system. It's match drill and hacksaw is all you need to build a pretty good robot out of that stuff. Same with the kit chassis of the past few years. You can do it with a hacksaw. It has a bunch of pre-spotted, pre-drilled holes for several different configurations. They're really geared to those teams who are working out of a classroom who really only have a cordless drill and a hacksaw.
Yeah. I mean, I know on Apex we're lucky to have a few sponsors that can make some precision parts for us, but as far as an actual shop, we don't have one. We work in a classroom. We use basically Harbor Freight tabletop tools and a DeWalt handheld bandsaw on a stand, and being able to use the COTS parts. I think the biggest thing for us is all the half-inch hex, and now with Vex's and Andy Mark's releases, a lot more support for 3/8-inch hex as well. But the fact that there's so much stuff within the FRC ecosystem that works with half-inch and 3/8-inch hex, as long as you can drill holes, and the Andy Mark, I think, has some bearing plates out now that you can put the 1.125 OD bearings, so half-inch round, 3/8-inch round, or 3/8-inch hex, thunder hex, regular half-inch hex, like those will all go in there. So clamp that up on a piece of box tubing, drill some holes, and boom, there, now you've got a bearing that you can run a shaft through, and you can put chain and gears and gearboxes, whether it's a 57 Sport or a Versaplanetary or even one of the drive gearboxes options that are out there. So I think that's it's really just getting to know what's available to you and finding a build style that works for your team. Whether you're working with hand tools or you've got more advanced machining, there's products out there that you can leverage to do that kind of building with.
So I think our next question we have is, what are the best COTS items to buy with limited budget? Justin, what do you think?
All right, so I'll start with some basic tooling that are off the shelf that you really want. So obviously a standard set of drill bits, but also find yourself a unibit that does 7/8 and 1.125 because like the plates that we do for 558, sorry, wrong team. That's my old team. The polycarb plates we do, all the bearing bores are just done on a unibit on a drill press. So with polycarb, it's pretty forgiving. You can just drill slightly undersized and then open up with a deburring tool. Also another very important tool. But what parts should you buy? I mean, start with the kitbot for sure. If you think the gear ratio is off, buy some COTS gears and swap it in. And then stock up on polycarb and plywood and some Versatubing and wait to see the game. Versaplanetaries or the new planetaries from AndyMark are both great. They really help you get off the ground quick in terms of prototyping and then getting to that final design. Sprocket and chain 25 or 35. 35 if you just want to get it done, don't want to have to think about it. These are things that you can put together really quickly, especially when you're in the prototyping phase and you want to move forward quick. And then for me, pneumatics, get yourself a small compressor, like the kitted parts compressor. Get yourself some solenoids and plumb up a pneumatic system because it's the one thing that you can always expand on as you go through the season. And nearly every game we've done can benefit from having pneumatics. So last year alone, think about this, right? You want to expand your gear catching system at the human feeder, and you want to actively place the gear on the peg. That's 2 cylinders. And if all you have for motors on your robot is your drivetrain and the motor powering the compressor, and the rest is pneumatics, you can, in most years, build a really efficient and really basic, but really good robot. And I think more teams need to focus on that. Take the time to back up and think about what it really takes to be competitive, and then base your design around that and find that simplicity that you can build to.
For sure. I mean, you look at, Houston champion Crush, #1 overall pick on Roebling, was basically a pneumatic gear mechanism. They didn't even have a roller on it, right? Everybody else was building these roller systems, and they just said, you know what, we're going to put a polycarbonate scoop and a clamp on top and lift up the gear with some pneumatics. And I think they had one motor that drove a chain shoulder, and that was it. And they were the fastest gear robot out there. So understanding how to do simple things like that is really definitely helpful. As far as items to buy from a philosophical standpoint, I heavily recommend standardizing on something. We mentioned half-inch hex before, but if you're building up an ecosystem, if you have Versaplanetaries, right, you can get the other gear sets for it and just be able to swap them out. Or if you've got, some of these wheel options, right? Just buy a few different wheels every year that all fit on half-inch hex, and then when it comes around to prototyping and then building your robot, you can just go over and grab a few and use them. And so that really helps stretch your budget because you're able to reuse these parts year after year a lot of the time. And especially, if you're talking about sprockets too, standardize on a chain, whether it's 25 or 35, is helpful. If you're going to standardize, I'd probably recommend 35 because you just can't do anything in FRC that's really going to break 35. I'm sure somebody could, but it would take a lot. But then you're looking at, okay, make sure you've got 12-tooth sprockets and, a 36-tooth sprocket and a 60-tooth sprocket, and that kind of covers your bases. It might not be exactly the speed you want, but you're going to be able to do pretty much everything with that. And so having that kind of stuff and thinking about multiple applications rather than exactly the robot that you're looking at right then can go a long way. So our next question we got, I think we kind of, I literally just talked about this, but can you reuse COTS parts year to year? So
there is a caveat to it.
Yeah, there is.
So in the past, the manual has allowed for reuse of unmodified COTS parts, and people take the, I'm going to call it the reasonably astute observers viewpoint on that. They're not going to ding you on it for, oh, I bought this and then I scratched it. By the letter of the rule, yeah, sure, it's modified, but really it's the whole, have you drilled 20 holes in it? No? Okay, it's probably unmodified. So yeah, you can reuse COTS parts year to year as per previous game manuals. Hopefully the manual stays that way as well. Otherwise, probably have some pretty angry people who have been sitting on their Vex ball shifters or their Anti-Markiva shifters for a season waiting to use them. That being said, there's definitely some interesting caveats, like the reuse of COTS parts requires things to basically be it's considered COTS if it's sent to you in that way. So if it's an assembled gearbox that's sent to you, then you can reuse it as that assembled thing. But you couldn't walk into, say, an event with an assembled Versaplanetary, because they don't get sold that way. They get sold in parts of it are assembled, but you can't, without accounting for withholding, you can't walk in with free weight Versaplanetaries or 57 Sports with motors on them, or tough box micros that are assembled, because the caveat is that it's basically as it's sold to you in the manual.
I don't know. I'll just throw it to Justin and ask if there's particular parts that you guys use, take off old robots and use again, or just kind of, use in prototyping and then have around.
Yeah, so I think the stuff that we reuse the most is the Versaplanetaries. In prototyping, our drive wheels get swapped between robots like crazy. Like if we're trying 4-inch wheels or 2-inch, like 2-inch or 3.5s or Coulsons, or we're constantly swapping our drivetrain wheels to find out what we like the best. Same thing with gripper wheels. If we're doing testing, that's really popular for us to just be changing out quickly. We don't really reuse chain. We don't reuse sprockets. I mean, if they're in great shape, then maybe, but normally for competition robot, it's all new. Yeah, I mean, we reuse scrap material. We've definitely reused entire robot chassis in terms of prototyping, but those have never made it to the field. Those, we build all new stuff for our competition robot. But yeah, I mean, with all the COTS that are available, if they're in good shape and you haven't really messed with them, then they're ready to go. Otherwise, they're perfect for prototyping. So
yeah, I think that's a big one that we do on Apex as well. We tear down our practice robot every year before the new season, and anything that's not usable we throw out, and anything that's usable we keep around. And sometimes it's stock material that was just a long piece of stock that didn't really get beat up. It was just there. And so it's well, we'll either cut it up and use it on practice or competition robots next year, or most of the time it ends up getting goes as the first thing we grab for prototyping. So yeah, you definitely can, and we do. I think sprockets, pulleys, belts, etc. Especially belts are a little bit harder because they're usually designed exactly for a particular reduction in spacing, but once you've used enough of them, sometimes you can just design it such that you can use the same belt again, because that's what you used last time. And especially with Vex and AndyMark offers some sort of more or less standardized belting for HTD and GT2. Rather than picking a really odd size belt that you can maybe get off SDPSI, if you can rework your design a little bit to take one of those, you're more likely to be able to use it again in the future, because you're kind of sticking to a set of a more limited set of design parameters.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if there's one thing I would ever advocate not reusing, it's probably motors if you can afford it. They are a wear item um, on First robots, especially sim motors with their bronze bushing design that wears out pretty fast in the course of a season, and the motor just doesn't perform the same year to year. So I don't think I've actually ever been on a First team that has fielded a competition robot that has had used motors on it, just because it's not worth the risk of potentially damaged motor.
Yeah, and then when you're talking about the wear items, we're talking about the bearings and brushes mostly. Will tend to wear out, and if they've seen particularly hard play, sometimes thermal effects can start to degrade the motors as well. But we try and use all new motors on our competition robot. We'll reuse motors on the practice robot.
Sure. So
and that brings up a good point. If you're tuning, say, a shooter, like try and get a new motor for testing if you think you're going to be doing that, or using an old motor to test a shooter probably isn't a bad idea. It'll give you more overhead when you build the real thing. But just keep that in mind that the motor performance does change over time, both during your prototyping and the course of a season. So just keep that in mind when it comes to motors. They do have a shelf life, and we do abuse our motors in FRC. So,
yeah. So our next question is, what are some advantages of COTS for teams who already have great design and manufacturing capabilities? Justin, what do you think?
All right, so speed to completion. I think a team that you really want to take a look at here is like the Citrus Circuits. They have resources in-house. They have a decent amount of students. They have that CNC router in-house, but what do they really build with most of the time is like off-the-shelf parts because of the speed to getting things running. The faster you get things running, the faster you can iterate and the faster you can make that robot as good as you can. So, even if you have the best design capabilities in the world, like the use of COTS will still get you there faster.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you look at, to add some more teams to that list, 118 Robonauts has like Versaplanetaries plastered all over their robots every year. They paint them gold to make them look nice, but they're still Versaplanetaries. Right. Same with 148 Robo Wranglers. Obviously, they're an IFI sponsored team, but they've got amazing capabilities in from sponsors with sheet metal, and yet they're still using Versaplanetaries because they're easy. Right, and you can just slap them on there and be done with it, and you don't have to worry about actually designing a gearbox.
Yeah, absolutely. Just the time savings of not having to design a 4-to-1 gearbox for your roller intake. It just these days there's so many options for 4-to-1 reductions off of 775 motors and sims. You don't have to sit down and reinvent the wheel anymore. And just rather than back to the question of these teams who are looking for the advantage, you can spend all that design and manufacturing resources on the things that matter. Instead of spending it on reinventing the wheel, you can spend it on making that roller claw that much better.
Yep. I think, we also mentioned before with withholding allowance, I don't care how amazing of a team you are, you want to be using the 30 pounds of withholding allowance, and, to be able to bring things into the competition that doesn't count for that and have spare parts that don't count for that, especially if it's a game like last year, where if you were doing a fuel system, the number of motors and things required on that and different gearboxes was massive for most of the, best teams. If you're talking about, that being a mission critical system for you, having the ability to bring in parts, spare shooter wheels, spare, gearboxes, what have you, just having that and not having it count against your withholding allowance, so that you can also bring in, spare shooter structure, spare intake structure, etc. That's pretty big for a lot of teams, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Another question we have is, my team has a lot of trouble integrating mechanisms. How does COTS help us? Evan, what do you think?
Well, you can just use what's out there, really, and they've done a lot of the integration for you, I think, is the big thing. And I see a lot of teams who kind of use COTS on a surface level. But if you really start delving into how you can fit these parts together, right? So I'm gonna use one of the new VEX offerings today that came out with the 180-degree versaplanetary as an example, right? So basically, they said, okay, now here's a plate and some pulleys and a stage that you can put on to basically separate your motor from the versaplanetary and make the package a little better as far as space savings, right? Well, if you take those two parts individually, you've got an input into the versaplanetary, which allows you to input a 1/2-inch hex shaft. So you can put maybe your motor way down in the base of your robot, run a chain and sprocket up to the top that's a 1/2-inch hex, and then do a 5-to-1 reduction up there to your axle, right? And that's not something that they're necessarily showing you on the VEX page, but if you look at the parts and you understand how to do that, you can do that. The other thing you can do with their gusset plate is it's sized for a 12-tooth to 24-tooth GT2 sprocket, and the hole in the plate where the pulley would go is sized for a 1.125 bearing. So rather than putting a versaplanetary on that end, you can get a 2-to-1 reduction in the middle of a piece of VEX Pro box tubing or any other 2-to-1 box tubing by taking 2 of these plates, bolting it on, sticking a motor on, and sticking some pulleys and hex shaft in there. And now you've got maybe an intake roller, and you didn't have to do any kind of gearbox design. You just bought the parts and put it together. So that's the kind of stuff that I'd suggest to teams that they look at, is sort of think beyond what's just being offered at a surface level and look at what you can do with these parts that maybe is a mix of something that you make yourself plus something that you can buy off the shelf to give yourself way expanded capability or a lot better integration than you might have already had. I don't know if we have any other thoughts on that topic.
I think you pretty well covered it.
Yeah.
I mean, and at a basic level, right, that's what I'm doing every time I see a new product come out. It's like, okay, here's what it's intended for, right? That's cool. What else can I do with it that maybe, is a secondary, benefit?
Absolutely.
So the next question we got is, how will the new products released by popular FRC suppliers change the way you design and build your robot? So I just talked about one. I'm curious to hear what Justin thinks about some of the other stuff that's come out.
So in terms of change the way we build, I mean, it's just going to make what we do better, because now we have more available, and we already are like big on COTS usage, specifically the new stuff that's out. We haven't had time to digest exactly what we're going to use from the new offerings, but we don't know the game yet either. So it's a tough question to ask in terms of these new products. How will they apply? I will say that I'm certain some of them will end up on our machine. It's just a matter of where. And the 1/2-inch bevel gears that came out this year, with a 1/2-inch hex broach, like we had to make those last year because we wanted 1/2-inch. So now they're available. So those will probably get used right away, because we love to make a 90-degree drive for the versaplanetaries. So certainly those will be used if the need is called for. But like, there's just so much out there. I'm not going to say that we're going to go and build a 775 Pro drivetrain now. Maybe we'll buy some gearboxes to do some testing in the off season. So that's definitely made that barrier to entry easier for a team like us. Like now, if we want to go play with that, we can buy a set of gearboxes and test stuff. I think for prototyping, like all the wheels and all the gussets and everything that are out now, like we can't beat that in terms of making stuff in house to do things faster. So that's the biggest thing. Like this might change some of how we prototype, but in terms of how we build, we love COTS already. So
there's kind of a theme here. Is there's not saturation yet in the COTS market. There's now the suppliers are into filling the niche things that people have been asking for. Both the Animark and VEX releases are basically filling in the holes that have been identified over the last 2-3 seasons or so. There's a couple things that stand out to me as like things that I've wanted to use that are tiny things. Probably one of the best ones is the new 3/8 Churro Light that Animark came out with this season. That purely exists because the team I'm involved with, Team Cybertooth, had some 3/8 size standoffs that were not quite McMaster friendly. We had to make some of them, and I didn't want to do that anymore. So that exists from that robot. That's probably my favorite example because it was one of those easy CAD drawings, get quoted, and it exists sort of projects, unlike designing a whole planetary gearbox or something that takes a lot more time and effort. But yeah, just the vast pile of things that are now available. I mean, I think the roller system from the improved roller system that West Coast Products started working on last season that VexPro now has, that's going to make making those tube rollers a lot easier for the average team because they don't have to make all those plugs or those little shaft pieces. So that's going to be nice to see a lot more teams able to have access to the tubing rollers that they hadn't had before.
For sure.
Uh-oh.
I think we lost Justin, unfortunately.
Justin?
That's unfortunate. I think another one, just to buy a bit of time there for Justin to come back. Another one I'm excited about is a lot of people beat us up over the size of the output shaft on the PG motors over the past forever. And now that they come in at 3/8 and half-inch hex, that makes a lot of our customers happy, and it makes me a lot more likely to use one on my team's robot as well because it's really easy to interface with all the parts that are available in the COTS market. Justin, welcome back. It looks like you lost you there for a second.
I have no idea what just happened.
Well, that's all right. I guess we could probably move on to our next question. This is kind of a tough one. How do you differentiate between good COTS and bad COTS? For example, what would or not be useful to a large subset of teams? Justin, what do you think? This is kind of a tough one.
Okay, so how about vectored intake wheels?
They're great for intakes, though. And teams numbered 1986.
Right. I mean, I think what you need to look at here is what is within your team's resources to actually make function. So, like, should you be doing 775 Pro drives if you don't know the software to make them foolproof? Should you be doing Mechanism or Swerve if you don't have the software to back it up? Like, those are things that are available to teams, but I'm not sure that they should be using them without developing that stuff in the off season. You know, I have nothing against using any of that stuff. Just try and do it in the off season so that you have that in your toolbox to pull out in season. How do you determine good versus bad COTS? I mean, read Chief Delphi to get a good idea of what other teams have said.
I think you kind of subtly hit on that. The bad COTS is stuff that doesn't work for your team's resources, but it's bad with an asterisk. It doesn't mean it's necessarily a bad product. It's just not the right fit for your team.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I think a good metric is anything that's going to cost your team more time during the build season than save is probably not something that's, that's worth doing. That's something you should save for the off season. There's also there's COTS in terms of stuff that's FRC suppliers that are designing for our use case, and then there's COTS that's McMaster or Marine Supply or whatever that's not designed for our specific little world here.
Right.
I think probably as close to universally bad as you can get is stuff that's just not available. Stuff that people miss the mark on stocking the right number of them. Definitely, that's kind of the hardest. This is probably one of the most volatile markets to try to stock parts for, especially when you don't know the entire game.
Yeah.
It's definitely difficult to go, oh yeah, we're going to sell 100 1-inch cubes, or we're going to sell 700 steel ball bearings. Like, it's kind of hard to predict those things. And items that are difficult to restock for those suppliers kind of ruins everybody's day. But I guess this is as close as, and that's kind of stretching it really from the FRC specific suppliers is stuff that people can't get.
Yeah. I guess, there's also, you could further break it down into more categories, right? So I mentioned the what saves you time, but there's COTS parts that replace some existing capability that you had with something you can buy off the shelf and save you time, and then there's COTS parts that add capability that your team wouldn't have otherwise been able to achieve. And so they're not necessarily good or bad in that sense, but one of them is going to come with inherently more risk. I'd say any COTS part that takes something that your team is already building and makes it so you can buy it Like unless it's a cost prohibitive thing, right? Because sometimes it is more expensive, right? You're basically paying for time. That's really something that I think is kind of a no-brainer to go buy, unless you're looking for like the very upper echelons of performance out of that, right? But if you're looking at something like, the game comes out and it's a nice flat field, and you wanna go with shifters this year, right? And you've been building a kit bot before, you can go and buy an Evo shifter and drop it into the kit bot, and that'll work. But if you're not familiar with how it's going to drive and all that stuff, you may be better off just sticking with a single speed for that season and focusing your effort on the scoring mechanisms, and then buying some shifters in the off season and retrofitting your robot with those. So I think there's a lot of examples like that, but I like to think of it in those terms of if you're trying to do something new that you've never done before, because there's a COTS product to do it, think twice. And if you haven't played with it.
Yeah, definitely. I had a thought, and the train has left the station. Oh no, it was a disclaimer that historically the Evo shifter has been a drop-in for the kit of parts chassis.
Yes, true. I'm talking about last year's kit of parts chassis. There's no guarantees that this year's kit of parts chassis, it could be a 2010 all over again, where they put the little risers on there. Oh god.
Maybe it won't have wheels. We don't know.
Oh god.
Oh god.
I've never heard that much dread.
Speaking of inventory that's going unused, all those drive gearboxes.
Oh no. Geez.
All right. Well, we got one last question, and hopefully it's not too difficult. But what is your favorite ice cream topping?
Justin, what do you think?
All right. So if I'm in the shop, most likely the ice cream topping that's going to end up in the ice cream is probably red grease from doing the Versaplanetaries.
Yummy.
Oh, I was going to say cutting fluid. That's better.
Yeah, WD-40 maybe. I mean, certainly maybe some aluminum chips sprinkled on there. Like that. Those are things that'll happen. I'm not saying those are my favorite. But actually, funny story. Ice cream on 558 is a massive incentive. So the kids on my team don't get ice cream unless we win a design award. I've kind of like put that out there as I will buy the team an ice cream party anytime the team pulls in a award for design. Points in districts is points, and if my kids can talk to the judges and get us a design award, I guarantee them a nice ice cream party, and then they get to pick the toppings.
Huh.
I might have to steal that idea. That's
we one of our team traditions, ice cream related, is we'll usually, because build season in the United States, McDonald's runs a Shamrock Shake promotion at that time of year. Our recent tradition the past few seasons have been to buy everybody who's around at 11 o'clock at night on bag day, if we're there that late, to buy them all Shamrock Shakes. The mentors kind of pull in and do that. It's kind of a fun thing. But as far as my favorite ice cream topping, it's a toss-up between the aluminum chips from a mill and or hot fudge.
Sticking with a classic there.
Yeah.
Well, all right. Going off the theme of team traditions here, on Apex at our reveal party, we do floats with red 7-Up and ice cream in them. So
nice.
we call them Apex Avalanche with vanilla ice cream. So it's not really a topping, but it is a fun little thing. But personally, I think probably just plain old chocolate sprinkles. I like chocolate sprinkles on vanilla ice cream.
It's pretty good.
Not fancy.
Kind of hard to compete with that. Well, I think that's all the questions we have. And I believe that brings us to the end of Behind the Lines for this season. Justin, thank you for taking the time to chat with us and spread to the world the magic of COTS. Definitely a big fan, not because I'm biased about that, but also because all the parts in the FRC universe definitely make it a lot easier for teams to build great robots instead of trying to reinvent the wheel. So thank you, Justin.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. It's been fun, and if I could say something, teams just try and find that simplicity, build within your resources, and utilize COTS parts.
Yeah, definitely. Again, thank you, Justin, and thank you to all the people tuning in live for this last episode of Behind the Lines. We'll also be you'll also be able to find this both on the Twitch chat, or not on Twitch, Twitch on our Twitch channel, as well as YouTube. Be able to see an archive of this in case your friends missed it. So words are hard. So make sure you let your friends know who aren't able to watch live tonight that this excellent preaching from Justin that you should be using COTS parts, and you should be using COTS parts, and you should be using COTS parts wherever you can. Definitely make sure to share that with them. With that, thanks again both to Evan as well for hanging out with us tonight. And with that, thank you and good night.